Hi friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel, So Obvious. I'm Apolinar, and in today's video we are going to be learning about 12 necessary items needed by all sewing beginners. Number 1, and the most obvious, the sewing machine. Duh. If you're just getting into sewing as a hobby, I wouldn't really recommend you getting a sewing machine that's very expensive. When you first start sewing, you're going to be making a lot of mistakes. There is a chance that you might ruin the machine itself, and I would rather be mad about breaking a $100 machine than crying over a $500 machine. When it comes to getting a sewing machine for beginners, it's important to think of quality over quantity. Just because it's computerized and it has more stitches does not necessarily mean that it's going to be better for you or that it's going to do better work. Of course, it's nice to have a machine with 80 different stitches, but what's the point of having 80 stitches if you don't even know what 75 of them do? There is a few stitches to make sure that your sewing machine has. For example, the straight stitch, the basting stitch, the zigzag stitch, some sort of finishing or serging stitch, and then if it has a buttonhole setting, that's great. But anything above that is really just extra. The very first sewing machine cost me like $70. It was on clearance. I don't even remember the name of the brand. It started with European something. It wasn't that great. It made a lot of mistakes, but it was the perfect starter machine for me. I used it for about 2 years, and then I was ready to invest in a more expensive machine. I currently have a Brothers machine that was about $300. I've had it for about 8-9 years. I also have a Singer's that cost me about $500. Well, it didn't cost me anything. I got it for free. A friend gave it to me. Friends! Number 2 and 3. Fabric shears, mini shears, and paper scissors. Yes, you need all 3, and no, you cannot use them interchangeably. The fabric shears are used to cut fabric, not paper. Do not use fabric shears to cut paper, or I will cut you. Mini shears are just mini fabric shears. You use them to cut thread, you use them to cut small pieces of fabric. It really comes in handy when you are sewing, cutting off all those little threads at the end of a seam, anything small really. And of course there is paper scissors. Paper scissors are used for paper. Okay, so cutting paper with fabric shears is not the end of the world. However, there is a reason for why people don't do it. Paper is meant to be stiff, and it consists of a lot of materials that can be very abrasive to the blades on your fabric shears. Whereas fabric is meant to be soft and pliable. If your fabric shears go dull, there's a chance that you won't be able to cut the fabric or will be damaging the fabric when you try to cut it. Another reason why I don't use these interchangeably is because these 2 shears cost me about $15 to $20. This one cost me about $4, and this one cost me about $2. So there's that. Number 4, pinking shears. Most new sewers aren't going to have a serger. When I first started sewing, I had no idea what a serger even was. So I was always using pinking shears. Pinking shears are a great way to finish off your fabric ends without having them fray. Number 5, a clear plastic ruler. These are great because they have markings all the way up to 1/16 of an inch, and you can lay them on top of your patterns whenever you need to make them bigger or smaller, which makes it possible for you to have more precise lines. Also, they can do this. Right? Number 6, a mechanical pencil. Clean, precise lines are necessary when you're working with patterns. Whether you're making your own pattern or altering a pattern, you need to have thin, clear lines. That's where these pencils come in. You don't have to sharpen them. They always have a nice pointed end, and they're easier to put up against the ruler. If the lead on a regular pencil isn't thin or pointed enough, you run the risk of over measuring or under measuring due to how thick the point might be. I know that doesn't seem like it's a big deal, but if you're off by 1/8 of an inch on each seam and there's a lot of seams on your garment, you could end up having a garment that is too big or too small by up to like 1 inch or 2, if depending on how many seams there is. Number 7, muslin fabric. Muslin fabric is the scratch paper of fabric. It is great to make samples out of because you can write all over it. If you make a mistake, it doesn't really matter. It's better to make a mistake with the muslin piece than it is to make with the piece made out of the final fabric. Muslin comes in different weights of fabric, so you should always try to find a muslin that has a similar weight to the final fabric that you're going to use on your garment or sewing project. Number 8, the seam gauge. Seam gauges are used to mark and measure small areas such as hems, pleats, or even the distance between buttonholes. When you first start sewing, you're going to be making a lot of mistakes, especially when it comes to hemming. Hemming is usually the last thing you do on a garment, and you really don't want to mess it up. In your mind, you can tell yourself that you know what 2 inches looks like, but by the end of the project, you're going to have a hem that starts out at 2 inches and ends up at about 1 inch over here. So seam gauges are very important for beginner sewers. Number 9 is really 3 things: tailor's chalk, fabric pens, and fabric pencils. Along with things like rulers and your seam gauges, one of the best ways to make sure that you make the least amount of mistakes is by using these things right here. You can use these to mark things like hemlines, seam allowances, buttonhole placement, notches, and darts as well. Yes, technically you can use regular markers, pens, and pencils, but some of those markings are going to be permanent, and they may even bleed from the wrong side of the fabric to the right side of the fabric, when all of these things are meant to come off with water, leaving no permanent marks. Number 10, iron and ironing board. I know it seems kind of obvious, but a lot of beginners choose to not do any pressing in between sewing their seams. Honestly, it's not a very good idea because pressing your seams helps set your seams, making them a little bit stronger. It also gives you an overall more professional look. Number 11, again, is 2 different things. It's pins, a pin cushion, or I personally prefer the little magnetic square. You should use pins to hold your fabrics together when sewing to prevent the fabric from shifting too much. There's a big argument with fashion designers between whether they want to use pins with little plastic heads like I do, or if they want the ones that don't have any pins. I don't really think it makes a big difference as long as you know how to properly use them. Don't ever sew over them. I just prefer these because I have really big hands and it's easier for me to grab these than it is to grab the little ones. They do have these type of pins with glass heads so that you can actually iron with them. These are plastic and they melt, so don't do that. And a pin or magnetic square is very important because when you get into sewing the way I do, you kind of lose track of where everything is and eventually you are going to knock them over. I used to keep these in a little container and I am very clumsy. So I would knock them all over and then I'd spend like 10 minutes picking up all these damn pins. And it's not fun because you will not find all of them and you will find the one that you missed when you step on it later. Not fun. Number 12, and possibly the most important thing for new sewers, the seam ripper. I both hate and love these things. Say this with me, you will make mistakes and that's okay. That's what these are for. Trust me, I've been sewing for about 10 years and I still mess up every once in a while. Sometimes I sew pieces the wrong sides together. Sometimes I'll sew pieces upside down. Sometimes my sewing machine's a little decides to knot all the threads underneath the fabric and then I have to take this and just freaking rip it out. These things are a necessary evil. No one likes them. You need one of these, no matter how good you are at sewing. Okay friends, that's all I have for you today. I hope you liked today's video. If you did, make sure to comment, like, subscribe, ring the bell, and share. If you have any ideas for any future videos that you want me to do or any questions on sewing that you think I might be able to help you with, leave a comment. I will read it. You can also find me on Instagram at @apolylook. You can shoot me some DMs there and I will try to get back to you. If you didn't like the video, that sucks. I'm sorry that you wasted all this time watching this video only to realize this far into it that you didn't like it. Okay, bye.